I never imagined my life would change with just a knock at the door. Alone in my silent home, I opened it to find a stranger, a young delivery man, drenched in the rain, holding a mysterious package with my name on it. His wide, innocent eyes locked with mine, but what started as a simple exchange soon spiraled into a moment I could never take back. Carolyn lived what seemed like the perfect suburban life. From the outside, her spacious house, high-powered husband, and carefully curated social media posts painted the image of contentment. But behind closed doors, the cracks in her marriage were undeniable. Brandon, her husband of 10 years, had become a stranger, distant, distracted, and consumed by his career. His late nights and endless phone calls had created a chasm that no amount of effort on her part could bridge. At first, Carolyn tried to keep herself busy with hobbies and volunteer work, but as the days turned into weeks and then years, the loneliness began to seep into every corner of her life. Even their conversations had become robotic, limited to household chores or finances. The warmth and laughter they once shared felt like memories from another life. Carolyn had always prided herself on being strong, holding things together even when Brandon's absence became unbearable. But as she stared at her reflection in the mirror one rainy evening, wrapped in her silk robe, she felt the weight of her solitude pressing down harder than ever. The sound of the doorbell jolted her from her thoughts, a sharp interruption to the quiet monotony that had become her routine. Opening the door, Carolyn was greeted by a young delivery man standing on the porch, soaked to the bone from the downpour. His damp uniform clung to his lean frame, and his wide-eyed expression held a mix of embarrassment and apology. His name tag read Ryan, and he extended a small package toward her with a sheepish smile. "I didn't order anything," Carolyn said, her voice laced with confusion. Ryan glanced at the label. "This is the address, ma'am. Maybe someone sent you a gift." She hesitated, eyeing the package. There was no sender's name, just her own scrawled neatly in black ink. A strange flicker of curiosity stirred within her as she reached out to take it. "Come in out of the rain," she said, surprising herself with the invitation. "You'll catch a cold standing out there." Ryan hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. Carolyn couldn't explain it, but his presence, youthful and vibrant, felt like a burst of color in her otherwise grayscale world. As Ryan stepped into the house, Carolyn could feel the shift in the air. The once cold, lifeless space now seemed charged with an energy she couldn't ignore. She handed him a towel, noticing the way his damp hair clung to his forehead and the faint tremor in his hands as he took it. "You didn't have to let me in, ma'am," Ryan said, his tone polite but hesitant. "Nonsense," Carolyn replied, masking her unease. "It's pouring out there. The least I can do is offer you some warmth." While Ryan dried himself, Carolyn set the mysterious package on the counter, her curiosity battling her better judgment. She offered him a cup of tea, and as they exchanged pleasantries, she found herself lingering on his words more than she should. His voice was soft, his smile boyish yet sincere. It had been a long time since she'd felt someone truly listen to her. "So, what's in the package?" Ryan asked, breaking the silence. His question jolted Carolyn back to reality. "Oh, right," she muttered, unwrapping the box. Inside was a silk scarf, crimson and impossibly soft. Carolyn frowned, running her fingers over the luxurious fabric. "There's no note, no sender information. It's strange. Maybe it's from your husband?" Ryan suggested, his tone light but curious. Carolyn let out a bitter laugh, quickly stifling it when she saw Ryan's expression shift. "No, Brandon's not the type. He doesn't think about things like this." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the room. Ryan, perhaps sensing her vulnerability, changed the subject. "Your husband must be really busy." "You could say that," Carolyn replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Work always comes first for him." Ryan nodded but didn't press further. Yet his presence, his gaze, seemed to dissect her defenses, leaving her feeling exposed in a way she hadn't felt in years. The warmth of the tea in her hands did little to ease the growing tension. As they talked, Carolyn noticed subtle changes in Ryan's demeanor. His eyes lingered a little too long, his voice softening with each word. And yet, she couldn't deny that she welcomed it. The way he looked at her made her feel seen, desired, a stark contrast to Brandon's cold indifference. When the rain let up and Ryan stood to leave, Carolyn felt an inexplicable urge to stop him. Her fingers brushed against his as she handed him his coat, and for a brief second, their eyes met. There was something there, something unspoken, but Carolyn quickly pulled her hand back. "Thanks for the tea," Ryan said, his smile tinged with something deeper. Take care, ma'am. Good night, Carolyn replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the door clicked shut behind him, Carolyn leaned against the counter, her heart racing. The scarf sat on the counter, a vivid reminder of the encounter. But something about Ryan's words, his lingering gaze, stayed with her. It wasn't just the loneliness anymore. It was the suspicion, the spark of something forbidden that refused to leave her mind. That night, as Carolyn climbed into bed, her thoughts spiraled. What was it about Ryan that made her feel so alive? Why had she opened the door, invited him in? And why did the scarf feel like a harbinger of something she couldn't yet understand? Her phone buzzed suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts. A message lit up the screen. You deserve more than this. There was no name, no number, just those 5 haunting words. Her breath hitched. Was it from Ryan? From Brandon? Or someone else entirely? As her pulse quickened, she realized this wasn't just an innocent encounter. Something deeper, darker was at play. The next morning, Carolyn awoke feeling restless. The rain had stopped, but the memory of Ryan lingered, as vivid as the crimson scarf draped over the chair. She couldn't shake the look in his eyes, the warmth of his voice, or the way his presence had stirred something in her that she thought was long gone. Brandon had already left for work, leaving only a note on the counter. Late meeting tonight. Don't wait up. Carolyn sighed, crumpling the paper in her hand. The house felt colder without him, though his presence hadn't provided much warmth in years. By mid-afternoon, Carolyn found herself scrolling through her phone, half hoping for another message. She scolded herself for her foolishness, but when the screen lit up with a notification, her breath caught. It was a text from an unknown number. I didn't mean to overstep last night. I hope you're okay. Ryan. She didn't need to see his name to know it was him. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating whether to respond. Against her better judgment, she typed back, I'm fine. Thank you for bringing the package. It wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it. His reply was almost immediate. It was no trouble. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You seemed distracted. Carolyn felt her cheeks flush. Distracted? Was it that obvious? She wanted to deflect, but instead, her fingers typed a truth she hadn't planned to share. It's been a rough time. My husband and I. We're not in a good place. There was a pause before his reply came through. I'm sorry to hear that. You don't deserve to feel that way. The simplicity of his words felt like a balm to her fractured emotions. Someone saw her, acknowledged her pain, and it made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. They exchanged a few more messages, their conversation growing more personal with each passing minute. Ryan told her about his architecture classes, his struggles balancing school and work, and how he often felt like he didn't belong in either world. Carolyn found herself sharing pieces of her own life, her unfulfilled dreams, her struggles with Brandon's detachment, and the aching loneliness that consumed her. As the days passed, their messages became a routine, each one a bright spot in Carolyn's otherwise bleak existence. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Ryan listened, the way he seemed to care without expecting anything in return. And yet, there was an unspoken tension in their exchanges, a line they were dancing dangerously close to crossing. One evening, Ryan texted her, I'll be nearby tomorrow. Do you want to grab coffee? Carolyn stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She knew she should say no, but her fingers betrayed her. Sure. There's a little cafe on Pine Street. Noon. The next day, she found herself sitting across from Ryan in the quiet corner of the cafe. He looked different out of his delivery uniform, more polished, more confident. But his boyish charm was still there, in the way he smiled and leaned slightly forward, hanging on her every word. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Carolyn found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in what felt like years. The way Ryan looked at her, like she was the only person in the room, made her feel alive in a way she hadn't since her early days with Brandon. When the conversation lulled, their eyes met, and the air between them grew heavy. Ryan reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. It was a small gesture, innocent in theory, but it sent a jolt through Carolyn's entire body. You deserve to be happy, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Carolyn pulled her hand back, her cheeks flushing. Ryan, I'm sorry, he interrupted, his expression earnest. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I see how much you're hurting, and it's not fair. You shouldn't have to live like that. His words hung in the air, a confession wrapped in concern. Carolyn's mind raced. She knew this was dangerous, that she was playing with fire. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the way his presence made her feel alive, desired, and important. When they parted ways, Ryan hugged her, a gesture that lingered just a moment too long. As Carolyn walked back to her car, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had crossed a line, even if only emotionally, and she couldn't ignore the gravity of what was happening. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed again. It was Ryan. "Thank you for today. I hope you know how special you are." Carolyn's chest tightened. She knew she was standing on the edge of a precipice, and one more step could change everything. But instead of deleting the message, she typed back, "Thank you, Ryan. I don't think I've felt this way in a long time." Carolyn woke the next morning to find her emotions in chaos. Her heart and mind waged a silent war, guilt, desire, and the painful truth about her marriage all clashing together. Brandon had left for another early meeting, leaving no sign of acknowledgement or affection. It felt routine now, this coldness, and yet it was suffocating. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Expecting another text from Ryan, Carolyn hesitated before picking it up. But instead of Ryan, it was an unknown number. "You should know the truth about Brandon. Meet me tonight at 8. You'll get your answers." Her breath hitched. Who could this be? Was this connected to Ryan, or something else entirely? She stared at the message, debating whether to ignore it or take the bait. Her curiosity burned too brightly to be silenced. With a deep breath, she replied, "Where?" The reply came moments later, "The old diner on 5th. Come alone." The day passed in a haze, her mind consumed with questions. When the clock neared 8 p.m., Carolyn grabbed her coat, her hands trembling as she stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were quiet as she drove to the diner, her thoughts racing. Who had sent the message? And what truth could they possibly reveal about Brandon? The diner was nearly empty when she arrived. A single figure sat in the far corner booth, their face obscured by the dim lighting. As Carolyn approached, the figure looked up, and her heart stopped. It was Ryan. Her initial shock gave way to confusion, then suspicion. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. He gestured for her to sit, his expression unusually serious. "I didn't mean to scare you, but there's something you need to know. Something about Brandon." Carolyn's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Ryan pulled a small envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. "This will explain everything." With trembling hands, Carolyn opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough to recognize Brandon with another woman. They were in various locations: a hotel lobby, a park bench, a candlelit restaurant. The timestamps on the photos were recent, coinciding with nights Brandon claimed to be working late. "No," Carolyn whispered, her voice shaking. "This can't be real." "I wish it wasn't," Ryan said softly. "But there's more." He hesitated before pulling out a flash drive. "These are recordings. Phone calls, messages. He's not just cheating on you, Carolyn. He's planning something." Her pulse quickened as she stared at the flash drive. "Planning what?" Ryan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "She's been pressuring him to leave you, but he has other plans. Financial plans. He's moving money, transferring assets. Carolyn, he's preparing to cut you out of everything." The weight of Ryan's words sank into her chest, constricting her breath. The betrayal, the deceit, it was too much to process all at once. "How do you know all this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ryan hesitated, his gaze steady. "I overheard things during my deliveries to her house. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when I saw the packages meant for you mixed with hers, I started connecting the dots." Carolyn's mind raced, piecing together the clues she had ignored for so long. The late nights, the unexplained expenses, the emotional distance. It all pointed to a truth she had been too afraid to confront. But as much as she wanted to crumble under the weight of this revelation, another emotion began to stir within her: anger. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "Why do you care?" Ryan's expression softened. "Because you don't deserve this, Carolyn. And because I care about you." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Carolyn's chest tightened as conflicting emotions swirled within her. She wanted to trust him, to believe that his concern was genuine. But doubt lingered, fed by the cryptic message she had received earlier that week: "Don't trust anyone." Before she could respond, the diner door swung open, and her heart stopped. Brandon stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto her and Ryan. "What's going on here?" Brandon demanded, his voice cold and sharp. He stepped closer, his gaze flicking between them. "Carolyn, why are you here with him?" Carolyn scrambled for an explanation, her mind racing. I was meeting a friend." "A friend?" Brandon repeated, his tone dripping with suspicion. His eyes shifted to Ryan. "And what kind of friend are you?" Ryan remained calm, his posture relaxed but his eyes unwavering. "The kind who tells her the truth when she deserves to know it." Brandon's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Ryan said, his voice steady, "that she knows about you and your little affair. She knows about the money you've been hiding, and the lies you've been telling." The color drained from Brandon's face, but his shock quickly turned to anger. "You've been spying on me," he spat, his voice rising. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "I think I'm the person who cares more about her than you ever did," Ryan shot back, his tone firm. "Stop it, both of you," Carolyn shouted, her voice trembling with frustration. She stood, her hands clenched into fists. "Brandon, is it true? Have you been lying to me? Stealing from me?" Brandon's silence was deafening. His refusal to deny it spoke louder than any words could. Carolyn's heart shattered, but her resolve hardened. "I want you out of the house," she said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. "Tonight." Brandon scoffed, but there was an edge of desperation in his voice. "Carolyn, be reasonable. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," she snapped. "And I'll know everything once I go through the files Ryan gave me." Brandon's eyes flicked to Ryan, a mix of rage and panic. "You've made a mistake crossing me," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Ryan stepped forward, his expression unyielding. "The only mistake I made was not telling her sooner." Brandon glared at them both before storming out of the diner, slamming the door behind him. Carolyn sank back into the booth, her body trembling from the confrontation. Ryan reached out, his hand covering hers. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "I'll help you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Carolyn felt a glimmer of hope. But as she looked at Ryan, the weight of the message still lingered in her mind. Don't trust anyone. The days following the confrontation at the diner were a whirlwind for Carolyn. Brandon left the house that night, his parting words bitter and laced with veiled threats. His departure left an eerie silence in his wake, but it was a silence Carolyn welcomed. For the first time in years, she felt a semblance of control, though the storm brewing beneath the surface was far from over. Her focus shifted to the evidence Ryan had provided. Late that night, she plugged the flash drive into her laptop and opened the files. What she found confirmed every suspicion, and more. Financial documents revealed secret accounts, substantial withdrawals, and transfers Brandon had made without her knowledge. Recorded conversations exposed his plans with the other woman, not only to leave Carolyn but to leave her with nothing. The most chilling discovery was a video file. In it, Brandon and the woman discussed Carolyn as if she were a disposable obstacle. "Once we're done, she'll have no choice but to leave," the woman said, her voice cold and calculating. Brandon's response made Carolyn's stomach churn. She's too naive to see it coming. Carolyn's grief quickly turned to anger. For years, she had shouldered the burden of keeping their marriage intact, convincing herself that Brandon's distance was temporary, that his career took priority out of necessity. But now she saw the truth. He had never intended to fight for their marriage. He had only fought to protect himself. Ryan remained a constant presence throughout the fallout. He checked in daily, offering his support and encouragement. Though she appreciated his kindness, a part of Carolyn couldn't shake the warning she had received. Don't trust anyone. As much as she wanted to believe Ryan's intentions were pure, the weight of her betrayal made it difficult to trust anyone fully. One evening, as they sat together in Carolyn's living room, Ryan noticed her hesitation. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "I'll help you fight this. Whatever you need." "Why?" Carolyn asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Ryan hesitated before responding. "Because I care about you, Carolyn. And because I can't stand to see you hurt." His words were sincere, but they only deepened her internal conflict. She wanted to trust him, to lean on him, but the shadows of Brandon's betrayal loomed too large. For now, she chose to keep Ryan at arm's length, even as his presence offered a fleeting sense of comfort. Meanwhile, Brandon's absence was far from peaceful. He bombarded her with calls and messages, alternating between pleading for forgiveness and threatening retaliation. "You'll regret this," he warned in one voicemail. "You don't know what you're doing." Carolyn ignored him, pouring her energy into building her case. She hired a lawyer, determined to protect herself and her assets. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence became ammunition in her fight to reclaim her life. But the pressure took its toll. Carolyn found herself battling waves of doubt and fear, questioning whether she had made the right choices. Late at night, she replayed Ryan's words in her mind, his reassurance a fragile lifeline amidst the chaos. Yet the message, don't trust anyone, never stopped haunting her. One evening, as Carolyn was reviewing documents, a loud knock echoed through the house. Her heart raced as she approached the door, peering through the peephole. Brandon stood on the porch, his face shadowed by the dim light. "Open the door, Carolyn," he called, his tone eerily calm. She hesitated. "What do you want, Brandon?" "I just want to talk," he replied, his voice softening. "Please, Carolyn. We can fix this." "Fix this?" The audacity of his words ignited a fire within her. "There's nothing to fix, Brandon. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." His calm facade cracked, anger flashing across his face. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know enough," Carolyn shot back. "And I'm done letting you control me." Brandon stepped closer to the door, his voice lowering. "Be careful, Carolyn. You're making enemies you don't want." Her hands trembled as she held her ground. "Leave, or I'll call the police." He glared at her for a long moment before turning and walking away. But as he disappeared into the night, Carolyn couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Inside, her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Are you okay? I had a feeling he might show up tonight." Carolyn stared at the screen, her mind racing. How had Ryan known? The question lingered as she typed back. "He came by, but he's gone now." "How did you know he would come?" Ryan's reply was quick. "I've been keeping an eye on things just in case. I didn't want him to hurt you." The words were comforting, yet unsettling. Carolyn wanted to believe Ryan's intentions were noble, but the warning played on repeat in her mind. Don't trust anyone. As the night stretched on, Carolyn sat alone in the dimly lit house, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear, anger, and doubt. She had taken the first steps toward reclaiming her life, but the road ahead was uncertain. The betrayal, the lies, and the lingering question of trust weighed heavily on her. Could she trust Ryan? Or was he just another danger waiting in the shadows? In the weeks that followed, Carolyn's life began to shift. Brandon's absence, once a source of dread, became a welcome reprieve. She immersed herself in building a new foundation, piecing together the fragments of her life while preparing for the legal battle ahead. The evidence Ryan had given her was crucial, but it also served as a painful reminder of how deeply she had been betrayed. With her lawyer's help, Carolyn froze the joint accounts Brandon had tried to drain and secured her financial position. The divorce proceedings loomed, but for the first time in years, Carolyn felt empowered to stand her ground. Still, the emotional scars ran deep, and the weight of Brandon's threats lingered. Ryan remained in her orbit, his support unwavering. He checked in daily, offering kind words and a listening ear. Carolyn appreciated his presence, but the warning, don't trust anyone, was a constant refrain in her mind. She couldn't ignore it, and it colored every interaction with Ryan. One evening, Carolyn decided to confront her doubts. She invited Ryan over, determined to lay everything on the table. When he arrived, she greeted him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. They sat across from each other in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. "Ryan," Carolyn began, her voice steady but cautious, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course," he said, his gaze unwavering. "That night at the diner," she continued, "and everything you've done since. Why? Why did you get involved? Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Ryan leaned back, his expression softening. "Because I've been where you are, Carolyn. I've watched someone I care about suffer because of lies and betrayal, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. When I saw what Brandon was doing to you, I couldn't just stand by." His sincerity was palpable, but Carolyn pressed further. "And the message I got, about not trusting anyone, was that from you?" Ryan's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "No, I wouldn't do that. But whoever sent it was right to warn you. You've been through too much to trust blindly. I don't expect you to trust me completely, Carolyn. I just want you to know that I'm here for you." Carolyn studied him, searching for any hint of deception. But all she saw was a man who had stepped into her life when she needed help the most. Still, the scars Brandon left behind made it hard to believe in good intentions without suspicion. "I don't know if I can trust anyone right now," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan nodded, his expression understanding. "That's okay. Trust takes time. I'll be here, whether you're ready to trust me or not." His words struck a chord, and for the first time, Carolyn felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. She wasn't ready to let them down entirely, but the possibility of rebuilding her faith in people felt like a step forward. As Ryan left that evening, Carolyn stood by the window, watching him walk to his car. The past weeks had tested her in ways she never imagined, but they had also taught her invaluable lessons. The importance of protecting herself, the power of resilience, and the strength to confront the truth, no matter how painful. In the quiet of her home, Carolyn finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. Brandon's betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had also forced her to confront the reality she had ignored for far too long. She deserved more than a life of neglect and manipulation. She deserved honesty, respect, and the chance to rediscover herself. As the night deepened, Carolyn picked up the crimson scarf, its soft fabric a reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. But instead of sadness, she felt a sense of resolve. This wasn't the end of her story, just the beginning of a new chapter. I learned the hard way that trust is earned, not given. But no matter how tempting it is to close yourself off, life is meant to be lived. And I won't let fear keep me from living mine. If you were in Carolyn's position, would you give Ryan a chance or walk away to rebuild on your own? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions could inspire someone else going through a similar struggle. And don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, emotional stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned, there's more to come.